Florian stood silently for a moment and turned to the doctor. "How does it look?" "Not too bad," the doctor replied, setting the scanner aside. "One operation might be enough. I'll have a more detailed analysis tomorrow. If you'd like, stop by. We'll arrange the details of her stay. Even if one procedure suffices, I'll have to connect her to the doc several times for diagnostics. I'd prefer not to do that while she's sedated. We'll need to think through logistics." The next day, they agreed that whenever Olavia had to be transferred to the dock, they would blindfold her, perhaps under the pretext of protecting her eyes. The doctor had already prepared detailed models, the before state, the after, and simulations covering possible complications. "I'll practically have to regenerate her entire mouth," he explained, swiping through the images on the screen. "There are even some options here." "What do you think?" he asked, showing Florian the different variants. "This one," Florian said after a brief moment of thought. Then, with a faint smile, he added, "Make sure she'll be a great kisser." "Oh," the doctor raised his eyebrows. "And why do you care?" he asked, looking up from the console. There was genuine curiosity in his tone. "I thought your relationship was strictly professional." "Olavia's in love with me," Florian said flatly, without hesitation. "Oh," the doctor raised his eyebrows again. "And you?" "Me? I suppose I need more time," he replied evenly. "Florian, has anyone ever told you that you might be a psychopath?" The doctor asked after a pause, only half joking. "A few people," Florian answered dispassionately, also not entirely joking. And, under the weight of public opinion, I took a psychological profile test," he said matter-of-factly. And it turned out I'm not." "Good to know," the doctor remarked after a moment's reflection, though not very convincingly. As agreed, Olavia arrived 2 days later. She was visibly nervous, but also excited. "I'm ready," she said quietly. "Good. Please put this on," the doctor replied, handing her a surgical gown. They had chosen a modern standard gown that looked entirely ordinary, and indeed, it didn't raise the slightest suspicion. "Please drink this and lie down here," the doctor continued. Olavia obeyed, though she eyed the set of surgical tools lying beside the bed with obvious unease. To her, they looked more like instruments of torture than medical equipment. A moment later, she closed her eyes and drifted into sleep. "Where did you get those?" Florian asked, pointing at the tools. "Bought them once at a local market," the doctor said with amusement. "They seemed fascinating. Looked quite professional, too. It's easy enough to guess what each might have been used for. I put them out for authenticity." "Brilliant idea," Florian admitted. They began the procedure. Olavia was transferred to the real medical room and connected to the dock. The damaged tissue and bone fragments were removed. Then everything was carefully aligned, and the system initiated the regeneration sequence. That phase was to last 2 days. During that time, Olavia remained fully anesthetized, necessary to prevent any movement. Afterward, the process would continue autonomously, stimulated by signaling proteins. These were supplied through a specially designed stabilizing mask that covered her face and head. Later, they planned to wrap it with bandages so everything would appear normal. The girl woke up exactly 2 days later, as predicted. For a week, she could only drink through a straw, but she didn't complain. She had endured far worse in military camps. Her only complaint was boredom. "You can play cards," Florian once suggested during a visit. "With myself, I might lose too much," she joked. "Then I'll teach you solitaire," he said with a smile. Olavia learned and actually started playing solitaire, though mostly because there was truly nothing else to do. After a week, she could eat some solid food again and was technically allowed to go outside, but with her head wrapped like a giant cocoon, she had no desire to. So she waited. Everything had gone well. A second procedure wasn't necessary. The great day was approaching quickly. 2 days before the end, they had to sedate her once more to remove the medical helmet. The doctor applied only a lightly supportive dressing so that the muscles developing on the remnants of signaling proteins could align properly. After that, normal metabolism would take over. And finally, the day came. Florian arrived a little early. "Ready?" he asked, I don't think I've ever been this ready for anything, she replied calmly, though a tremor of tension ran through her voice. On one hand, I can't wait, and on the other, I'm scared. I know I shouldn't expect miracles. The doctor said everything went very well. It shouldn't be bad, Florian reassured her. A moment later, the doctor entered. He greeted them and said matter-of-factly, I think we can proceed with removing the dressing. After a brief pause, he added, It's recommended that the patient be seated in situations like this. He seated Olavia in front of a large mirror and slowly, carefully began cutting the bandages with scissors from his archaic set. He wasn't very deft at it. In truth, he had no experience at all. The girl was clearly growing impatient. Her breathing quickened. Her hands tightened around the armrests of the chair. At some point, she couldn't stand it anymore. She jumped up, snatched the scissors from his hand, and with a few quick snip, freed herself from the bandages. She looked into the mirror and froze. A face stared back at her. Perfect. Hers, and not hers. Prettier. More refined. Ideal. Those weren't exactly her lips. When she opened her row of straight, flawlessly aligned teeth, she had never had such teeth, not even before the injury. Florian and the doctor had warned her that some scars would remain, but there were none. Olavia knew scars. She had seen pretty ones and ugly ones, those you could live with and those that never let you forget. She had hoped to be left with the first kind, but she had never dared to dream. Yet now her skin was flawless, her face perfectly symmetrical. I must still be dreaming, she thought. But then she realized she could never have dreamed up something like this. I think it went quite well, she heard Florian's calm voice. She turned abruptly, and suddenly that strange feeling returned. The same one she had felt when Florian first suggested the operation. That uncanny, unsettling conviction that she was dealing with something beyond the natural. Back then, he had downplayed it, so she had assumed she would simply end up with a stitched-up face that would at least function. But what she saw now was far beyond human capability. She stared at Florian, wondering who he truly was. She had never been particularly religious. Never had any reason to believe that gods meddled in the fate of this world. Never until this moment. Her head spun. Now she's your problem. My part's done, said the doctor, glancing at the unconscious girl before making a hasty exit. She woke up on the couch. Florian was sitting beside her. Slowly, memory returned. Hesitantly, she lifted her hand toward her face, then stopped. She was afraid she would feel bandages again, afraid it had all been a dream. Finally, she steeled herself. She touched her cheek. No bandages, no scars. She looked at Florian in panic. That's why it's recommended the patient sits up for this, he said inanely. Florian, who are you? She whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I'm just a man who has some unusual connections, he answered evasively, trying to smile. Who are you really? She repeated, this time almost shouting. Florian grew serious. Maybe I didn't think this through, he thought. He had imagined that a delighted Olavia wouldn't ask too many questions. It seemed he had been wrong. And aloud, without pretense, he said quietly, That's something I can't tell you. The girl suddenly sprang up from the couch. She ran back to the mirror and stared at her reflection for a long time. Florian approached her but remained silent. He didn't know what he could say that wouldn't sound foolish. Olavia suddenly turned to him, her face a chaos of emotions, eyes flashing. Without a word, she threw her arms around his neck and pressed her lips to his. Surprised, he hesitated for a moment, then returned the kiss. They stayed like that briefly, until she pulled away, looked him straight in the eyes with that same wild, confused gaze, and said softly, Thank you. Farewell, Flori. And she ran out. Florian never saw her again.